It matters how you divide it. I learned this a long time ago. In our family, we had 6. And when we had a pie, it was divided into 6 parts. If we had a brick of ice cream, remember those small bricks of ice cream? You divide it into 6 parts. Now the lesson was this. Whoever cut the pie or the brick of ice cream had the last piece. You know what that did? They made sure it was equal in division. Have you ever seen an uncut diamond? A diamond in the raw? For our eyes, it doesn't seem like very much. It's just basically a pretty rock, if that. But if it's a very valuable and big diamond, the experts will study that diamond for months. And then when they've decided where to strike the diamond, they will do it. And it will divide in the right place. At least they hope it does. When it comes to the scriptures, we need to divide it correctly. Now, many of us do devotions. We read the devotions, we read the scripture passage, or we go into our Bible and we read a certain portion of the Bible. But then we forget about it. But to understand it, to divide it correctly, we must do more than that. We must, as Psalm 1 says, we must meditate upon the law of God, or some people say ponder. It's another translation. And another one is simply to, can't remember. What it is remember how a stream goes around the rocks and makes that kind of bubbling sound? You've got, when you look at the scriptures, you look at it, you feel it, and you make sense of it, and you start to apply it to your lives. Now, those are the simple passages, but there are some that are more difficult. In fact, there are some passages that you would almost swear that they had a contradiction to other parts of the scripture. Really, they aren't. Scripture is flawless in that respect. However, there are things that we won't quite understand, such as the Trinity. There's a mystery to it, and we can't comprehend it with our minds. It's just so vast. We just have to accept it. A passage that is very difficult from my point of view and many other scholars is simply a one from Luke. Luke chapter 16, verses 1 to 13. Because it seems like when Jesus is talking about this manager who's been dishonest, that he's almost saying that, and almost praising people and saying, you can be dishonest. But that's not the way Jesus meant it. So we can divide this passage into 4 parts. And the first one is simply the dishonest manager. Sometimes we read about it in newspapers, hear it on the radio or TV, where somebody has gone and they've stolen money from an organization or a company, and they're called to account. They've taken money, they've tried to get the books, and they've fudged the books, and the money is missing. And that is what happened in the story that Jesus is talking about. This manager was using some of his master's wealth for his own gain, or the gain of somebody else. So he was being called to account. He was in trouble. There wasn't, in those days, there wasn't a severance package. There wasn't unemployment insurance. He could spend time in jail, and the jail in those days was not very good. And even if he got off with just losing his job, he had a problem. He hadn't worked physically for many, many years. And so he knew he couldn't do it, or he didn't want to do it. So he looked for a way out. And what he did was this. Before anybody else knew that he was going to be dismissed, he called in certain debtors. And he said, "How much do you owe my master?" And they would tell him, and they'd say, "Write down a lower amount." Now, why did he do that? He was very shrewd. He knew that they would be very grateful for what he had done for them. So when he got fired, he could call in the favors. Say, "I need someplace to live. I need a job." And they would give it to him, hopefully. That was his thought. Now, if I had been the master, I would have been angry, furious, because I couldn't do anything about losing all that money. But we learn here that the master praised this dishonest manager because he was so clever. Now, there's a difference between saying, "I applaud a dishonest servant for being so clever," and "I applaud a clever servant for being so dishonest." There's a difference. And some people think that Jesus is saying simply that we can be dishonest. But that's not what the passage says. The passage simply states that it wasn't the dishonesty, but the shrewdness that was praised. Jesus never tells us to be dishonest. He wants us to be above board in all things. And then he goes on and he says, "Friends forever." What the world does that mean? He says, "I tell you, use your earthly wealth to make friends, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into your eternal dwelling." Here he makes a distinction between people. I think I'm one ahead of myself. Yeah. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of light. He's talking about two types of people: the people of light and the people of darkness. Now, the people of darkness, we have all around us. You know, they live like us, they breathe, and they have jobs, and they have family. But inside them, there's darkness. And they are shrewd. What they want more than anything else is more of what the world has to offer them. Whether it's physical wealth, whether it's power, whether it's prestige or dignity, that's what they want. And they have no scruples about getting it. They know exactly how to do it. They have no morals. They will trample over anyone to get what they want, and it doesn't matter who it is. They know how to do it, how to get you to sign on the dotted line, how to give them money or give them what they want. But Jesus said, the children of light are not to be this way at all. And there's a reason for this. The reason is that the children of light had their priorities correct. Wealth is important to them, yes, but not as important as God himself. And so they put everything under God. and given those other things the correct place. So they're not as interested in gaining wealth as a non-Christian is, because that's their God, and it isn't our God. But Jesus tells us something about wealth. He says, I tell you, use your earthly wealth to make friends, for when it is gone, then you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. He's saying that anything that we have is a gift from God. Doesn't matter what it is, it's a gift from God. And he says what we need to do is to use that wealth and help others. He's not saying that we can't have enough to live on. He's not saying that. He's not saying that we can't have enough to give our children when we die. He's saying simply that we need to take that wealth, that extra, and help others. When we think of buying something, ask yourself, do you really, really need it? Could somebody else use that money instead of me that are poor? So he says, make friends. And he's saying simply that some of them will see something in you that they want, and they may become Christians. But then there's this title I have, and it's simply, Faithful is as faithful does. What does that mean? Have you ever dreamed of hitting the money load? I mean, somebody you didn't know gave you something in the will, or you won the lotto, and you say to yourself, well, this is what I will do. You know, help my kids, I'll help the poor, I give something to the church, I will buy a new house, whatever. You know, that's a dream. But how would you really use it? Well, Jesus makes a very interesting statement. He says this: whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. He's simply saying this: if you want to know how you use that money, look at how you're using money now. Who are you using it on? Using it just on yourself and what you want to get, or are you using it for other people? What we're talking about is character. We make many decisions through our life, and some of those decisions are really small. But those decisions are important. We tell somebody we'll do something. And if we do it, that's really important. If we make a promise to someone and we fulfill it, that's really important. And it always starts up small when we're younger. But those decisions should be a foundation for who we are as an individual, as a congregation. Because those little decisions become bigger decisions throughout time. So we need to remember to share. We need to remember to keep our word. Now, this is how Jesus puts it. I think rightly so. He says, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with other people's property, who will give you property of your own? Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if we have grandchildren or great-grandchildren, or if we know somebody and we give them something, maybe it's just a job to do, and they don't fulfill it, are we going to let that person have another job, another responsibility? Not likely. And so Jesus is telling us that we need to be trustworthy in the small things, and then he'll give us bigger things bigger things that we can do. And it all comes up to this, the last point, only one master. It's really hard to get your head around the thought that we need to give to others, that money is not the most important thing. And so Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. You will either love or hate one, or you will despise and be devoted to the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, the word money here means more than just the cash or what you got in the bank account. It means your wealth, your physical, material goods. And so Jesus is saying that you can only serve two masters. It's either God or money or material wealth. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you had people over you? I know I did in McMary's Packaging when I was a janitor. And you had the supervisors. One supervisor would say, you do this right now. And then a minute later, another supervisor comes and says, no, you do this right now. You can't serve two masters. You have to make a decision. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying you have to put God first in your life. And then the other things, such as your family, such as your work, such as your money, and so on, will fall into place because you have him first. But when it comes to money, sometimes it can make you a slave, or material things can make you a slave. A rainstorm comes up, you have trouble with your sub pump. When it's raining, you start to worry, don't you? Or you have money invested in the stock markets, and the stock markets go down. You start to be concerned. And what you think really is really important to you actually makes you a slave. It grabs a hold of you, and it holds you basically hostage. But Jesus says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I don't think through my whole history of preaching, I've ever preached on tithing. But that's one of God's ways of blessing us. You know what tithing is? Tithing is giving a certain portion of your money to God. And that is helping other people, giving it to the church. And in the Bible, it talks about 10%, but it could be 5% or 20% or whatever. And you say to yourself, how can that be a blessing? Here's how. I remember when I started, I was fretting, never make ends meet. But then I realized through time that I became a better manager of my money, and God blessed me in different ways. So I always had enough and more to enjoy. So all we need to remember is to put God first. And he's saying, if you put me first, it isn't that I'm trying to make you a slave. I'm not trying to take away your joy. I'm not trying to take away your peace. But I want to give you more. Give yourself to me. Make me first in your life. And all things will work out. Do we trust him? Do we trust him enough to give him all things?